měli vytvořený,
no. Jak ono zapně, Čeky máte.
Já zdravíčka. Určitě.
Vidím, že kam se mě to nemáte zádo, tak je tam. Vůbec je to divný formát, člověk člověk 2 hodiny čas 19 minutách.
Jsou právě to nějakou dobu měli takovou debatu, když se řešili klimatické změny, neřešili to jako já si myslím, že jsme několikrát včera, když to řešili, jako hodně řešili, když to nedělali tématu, vlastně to bylo přesně, ta diskuze, kterou to taková byla, jestli se lidi dohadovali, jako klimatická změna zrovna člověk nebo ne. Co ty řekli, že klimat se řeší, že to taky přesně jako konstruktivně, že to přesně taky vypadá tak, lidi nemají rádi se jako čeká. Ta diskuze je zajímavá trošku jinak.
Jo, to je.
A nemáte mi dávat.
No, ne. Jako se bavíte s někým, kdo úplně na druhé straně, tak by sám si hrozně nízko prostě se svou s nějakou profesionální, prostě je to po něčem jiném. Jasně. No. Jasně. Ach, idiotismus, no. Tak opojíme to úplně nesnáší. Se mám pocit jako restrikce. No, jasně.
And you're still with them. Are we good? Good to go? Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our German tech panel that will deal with the question of discrepancies in perception of Ukraine in the Czech and German cooperation. My name is Natalie Vogel. I'm a senior fellow with the European Center for Security Policy, and I'm detailed to the German language infospace, among other things, and also in charge of training and internal security. Without further ado, I think we might be late if we don't do a very good time management, which is entrusted to my colleague Carolina over there. She will make big signs to tell you to stop. You have 3 minutes to make your point. And then we wanted two important things. We wanted an interactive thing. We don't want these kind of academic things. We want to ask questions and give answers. And secondly, we want a strictly practitioner approach to be able to have concrete examples of the topic we are going to discuss. I'm going to introduce you, or maybe you do it yourself in the round, and then we will start by the first questions. Gerald Knaus, our migration czar. Do you care to say a few words about yourself?
Well, that's a misdescription. And given the state of migration policy in Europe, I'm not sure if anybody wants to have this title. But I run a think tank in Berlin, but we have worked a lot on refugee issues, migration, but also other issues, European enlargement, rule of law. and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Martin Bukalek from a think tank here, European.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Martin Bukalek. I'm the Executive Director of the European Institute for European Policy, which is the Czech-based think tank with the office also in Prague. We were founded in 1998 already, and we are, exactly as the name is saying, focusing mainly on the European policies.
Veronika Homolova is our new face. We have a new face policy here. She is a graduate of our Security Academy, and she's a historian by training. She's currently completing her PhD. Yes.
On issues of territorial autonomy. So I'm focused on national minorities, their rights, and also a post-conflict era.
Which university?
Charles University.
Martin Swarovski is the man I call at 3 o'clock in the morning to ask him questions on the east flank of NATO. And he usually has the answer.
Well, that's good to know.
Martin?
Yeah, thank you. I was 20 years at MFA, including 2 postmen abroad in Budapest, in Warsaw. And now I have been on the 4th year as a freelancer, political advisor, and practically on unpaid leave. That means holiday. So I'm enjoying my holiday.
And
I joined forces with European Values, where I established the program for security strategies.
To your right, Martin, we have Rebecca Harms, who is the grande dame of the Greens foreign policy, the mover and shaker for the Greens for decades. She was at the European Parliament until 2 years ago, and now?
Yeah, good question. So to cut it short, I'm mainly working right now with 2 non-governmental organizations in Berlin. One is called Kiev Dialogue. I'm a co-founder of this German-Ukrainian dialogue platform. I have been a co-founder in 2004 after Orange Revolution, and we are working very much with civil society in the regions of Ukraine. And my second task in Berlin is related to projects at Center for Liberal Modernity. And so in addition, I'm working for Eastern European journalists in the European Center for Press and Media Freedom also. So it's an initiative we started with as members of the European Parliament after the murder of Jan Kuciak in Slovakia, and it's now gaining grounds in Eastern Europe, and we are allowed since a certain while also to work in Eastern Partnership countries.
Right across you, Mrs. Harms, we have Pavel Havlicek, my dear colleague, analyst. I say colleague because usually we write on the same topics.
Thank you so much. Pavel Havlicek from the Association for International Affairs, a Prague-based think tank. I'm focusing on Eastern Europe, Eastern Partnership, relations with Russia, and all interconnected topics. Last year, we dedicated a lot of attention to exactly this topic, Czech-German exchange on the region of Eastern Europe, in particular Ukraine. So happy to contribute on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And on your right, we have Tomáš Littner from Respect magazine. So this is an investigative, very famous magazine in the Czech Republic. Do you care to speak about your work?
Well, I don't do investigative journalism. My colleagues are much better and more skilled.
And he's very modest as well.
I'm basically responsible for coordinating our foreign affairs reporting, and one of the countries that I write most about is Germany.
Thank you. On your, not directly, but on your right, we have Francesca Knas, who is an aide to the Member of Parliament Knut Abraham for the CDU. She specializes in human rights issues, among other things.
Yeah, so I'm an advisor to Knut Abraham, who is a member of the European Affairs Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, and Human Rights Committee. So those are like my fields of focus. And he's also rapporteur for Ukraine, Moldova, most of Central Eastern Europe. So yeah, maybe interesting.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have star investigative journalist for the Tagesspiegel, Claudia von Salzen, who is very dear to all kinds of autocratic regimes such as Russia, Azerbaijan, and you name them. She has been uncovering many scandals that took place in the media space, and she's been following also the trials of former Nazis. She certainly is quite prominent voice in Germany. Do you care to say
Thank you so
anything?
much. I have to say the same as my Czech colleague just now and say that, well, there were some investigative pieces, but it's not like I'm doing an investigative piece every day. So what I'm a political correspondent with the Tagesspiegel, a German daily in Berlin. And I've been following political events and German foreign policy very closely during the last nearly 2 decades. And yeah, it was not always fun.
I'm sure we are going to hear a lot about it.
We
in the
understand
next hour. So let me start with the first round. You will have 3 minutes to make your points, to convince us that you are right. And if we disagree, I invite you to ask questions and to discuss, and because this is interactive. Again, we do not want lectures. Rebecca Harms, please. It appears that Germany has stepped up its game and in terms of political support for Ukraine. The question is Germany really meeting the expectation of its allies, or could it do more, first of all? And second of all, can you share your specific personal experience in the field in this regard?
So the question is whether I'm a good witness to talk about what's going on in Germany, because I have to admit, for me, the whole war against Ukraine, the Russian war against Ukraine, is a very personal issue. So I'm so close to so many people and also so close to so many places under attack that it's for me, meanwhile, very, very difficult to forget about emotions. And in Germany, so especially so among people in my party, normally emotions and authenticity matters. So it's meanwhile maybe one of the major points under which you judge people. But on this very question about the war against Ukraine, so if people show emotions, they are more or less denied to participate in public debate, or they are Ukrainians. So Ukrainians, everybody says, you can show all your tears, so that's totally okay. But the judgments on tough issues are in the hands of more reasonable people. So that's one of the, I think, really difficult points right now with the Germans. You all know that Chancellor Scholz declared Zeitenwende has happened, also for Germans now. You remember that my minister, Annalena Baerbock, said after Putin declared war and the invasion started, we all woke up to a new world. But is this true for the Germans? And so while many people are complaining about insufficient delivery of weapons when they talk about Germans, so for sure, most of these complaints are right, mostly about being too slow. But what I feel is a huge disappointment about my compatriots not able to really recognize what is going on in Eastern Europe, so that they are not able to, in simple words, every Czech politician can say that they are not able to recognize that decolonization is still taking place in Eastern Europe, that the fight of Ukrainians is a fight for freedom and democracy and sovereignty, and that after so many years of so-called reunification on this continent, still for the majority of German citizens, there is terra incognita beginning maybe so only a few kilometers after the Polish border, behind the Polish border. And I think that's a real problem, that they think also that they can stay outside of this war because they are avoiding mistakes. So not knowing the countries, not having deep relations to culture and also actual developments in those societies helps them to keep a distance and to feel like Putin is not attacking us. So he is attacking Ukraine, and many are able to say that's totally wrong, but they are so totally different from people in Czech Republic, in the Baltic states, in Poland, who very much feel that this is a war still against also Polish sovereignty, Baltic sovereignty, etc. And my very feeling is today that if we are not able to close these gaps in the understanding about what's going on, then these, what was not outspoken today by the minister, and since I knew for a long time how the council works and also how the presidency has to work, I can accept it. But so these gaps between Eastern European or new member states, so states from Middle Europa or West Middle Europa, so the gaps between those states and Germany, but also what once was called Old Europe, Old European Union. These gaps would difficult to be closed and will have repercussions on many decisions to be taken in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, etc.
Thank you very much. It was very concise and certainly much food for thought. Martin Swarovski has been working the field in Berlin on a very regular basis, speaking to MPs and think tanks. What is the, let's say you don't have your diplomatic hat on, you have your EDC hat on. What do you tell the Germans?
First, about whether they stand up to expectations. It depends on the expectation, right? There were, in terms of providing military aid to Ukraine, there were a couple of disappointments on our side. So for me personally, one of the biggest disappointment was when CDU and CSU suggested in June providing 200 armored personal carriers, Fuchs, to Ukrainians, because it would save a lot of lives. Nowadays, around Kherson, a lot of lives of Ukrainian soldiers would have been saved with this 200 transport Panzer Fuchs 200. So this was disappointing for me. There were a couple of other disappointments. Let's say not enabling, let's say, swap between the German tanks and Polish tanks towards Ukraine. There were also a couple of delays in other weaponry. But on the other hand, the entire amount is, I think, pretty fair, right? 1.5 billion euros, and there is some substantial hardware, like the artillery, Panzerhaubitze 2000, but also Iris-T, which is now probably the best air defense in its category. And at the very beginning, Germany was also was able to provide very rapidly the necessary help at the very beginning of the conflict, meaning this man-portable anti-tank missiles, the Panzerfaust. And to my knowledge, or knowledge of my colleagues, they were really substantial weapon, and they provided 3,000 of them, right? And also they provided the man-portable Stingers and Strelas. So do not forget that at the beginning,
Germany was also able to react very quickly, which was actually the issue at all the administrations, including the Czech Republic. At the very beginning, we were all delayed. Maybe the quickest reaction time was at the Baltic states. Three of them, they were really quick and opened up all the stores. So we should not forget it. In longer term, I think there will be some substantial issues of sustainability of German aid to Ukraine, not just in terms of money for Bundeswehr. This is also an issue, and some games with figures and so on and so forth. But I think another two issues will be also renewal or boost of military industry in Germany, because if the military industry should be boosted and should increase the capacity, it will require some, let's say, guarantees. It will require some long-term guarantees from the state. I'm not sure whether this government will be able to provide some guarantees for military industry. And another issue, apart from financial one, will be personal one. Because nowadays the Bundeswehr has 180,000 personnel, and for its ambitions, let's say within framework nation concept, and we can elaborate later on it, because I see there really ground for Czech-German cooperation in framework nation concept, mainly building this, let's say, corps level huge, large formations. But for this, German Bundeswehr will need 250 soldiers. And I'm afraid that without introducing conscripts, German Bundeswehr will not be able to meet this ambition. And it will be very difficult issues. And I should come. So last thing, but last pieces, without elaborating on the details. If we want to have a Germany on our side, let's say on side of our eastern flank countries, we need to work on this. This is our homework. So I already witnessed a couple of really important politicians in Germany that went through the, let's say, personal change, personal turning, Personalzeitenwende. We need to work for them, we need to support them, and they should know that we appreciate them. This is our homework to have Germany on our side. Stop here.
Thank you. Well, Mrs. Knaus. This is a call to your boss that is just being made. If I could add to the background information, Knut Abraham, who is a career diplomat, was formerly in charge of Central Eastern Europe and the Caucasus from the Department of Foreign Policy of the Chancellery. So he basically carried out the policy of Mrs. Merkel towards Russia. This includes energy dependency. This includes failing to meet the NATO 2%. So what happened to your boss? He woke up one morning and said, I think I was wrong. Must have been in February.
Maybe I can add to that Knut was always very skeptical of exactly that policy and Nord Stream 2. So, of course, I mean, he worked in the Chancellery, but he was always more like trying to be skeptical towards that because he knows the region very well. And he has been a diplomat in many Central Eastern European countries for many years. So he has a lot of contacts, and I think similar to Harms, a lot of contacts to Ukraine as well. So maybe for the context, let me just say that there are actually 3 points I would like to make and give concrete examples from the Bundestag. So, I mean, one topic that was mentioned is the weapon deliveries and the frustration this causes. Also, I know in Czechia with the German policy. And I think one thing interesting to mention is that the German debate is way more diverse than it's perceived from abroad. And there are, luckily, MPs from all parties. So the Greens, the head of the European Committee in the Bundestag, Hofreiter, very outspoken on that issue, but also in the Liberals, head of the Defense Committee, she's from the Liberals, Frau Strack-Zimmermann, also supporting, for instance, the delivery of battle tanks. But also in the SPD, I mean, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee was also supporting this idea. So I think, and I mean, the CDU was mentioned very strong. We had 2 motions on this, trying to push the government. Nevertheless, there is resistance, and I think the main argument that's now in the air is just Germany doesn't want to have this Alleingang, so go independently. So I think this is where we actually also as Europeans have a responsibility to say, well, we can. There are 13 countries in the EU that have, for instance, these Leopard 2 battle tanks. So why doesn't Czechia ask Poland, maybe Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, to say together, we support delivering these battle tanks, we will go doing this, and then Germany will kind of have this argument taken away that it doesn't want to be alone. So I think that this is something where we all can play a role in pushing the government, especially the Chancellery, to act more. And it's good if we recognize that we have allies in all parties. Of course, so this was one point I think we could all push for more, because we know how important these tanks are also for Ukraine. The second issue is enlargement. I think now Ukraine and Moldova got the status of candidate status, which is symbolically extremely important, but now we have to be very careful as to prevent this getting stuck like in the Western Balkans. And this is something that Knut Abraham has been pushing for also in his party. The idea that, first of all, we need to open accession talks as quickly as possible. And I think now with the Czech presidency and the Swedish presidency coming up, these 2 countries could play a crucial role in pushing for opening accession talks immediately. And the second point, which the CDU and CSU is also really pushing for now, is to say, if the conditions are fulfilled, especially Moldova and Ukraine, within the next 5 years, this is possible. I mean, many EU countries have succeeded in doing this. Then we should offer them to become part of the single market, just like Norway has, or Austria first joined the EU in this way. So I think this is like the second issue where we can maybe play a crucial role to send a signal to Ukraine and Moldova. This is not just symbolically, but we actually take this path seriously. And my last point, also because in the Czech Republic recognized the Holodomor this year as genocide, and this is going to be the 90th commemoration this year. And I think we, like Knut Abraham, has strongly advocated for Germany to do the same. Why? Not because we want to put this in a context with the war, but as Frau Harms has mentioned, there's this gap of understanding in Germany of Ukrainian history, of Ukrainian politics, and I think the Holodomor is just one example of this gap which has to be filled. So maybe I can appeal to our Czech friends, encourage our German politicians. Why did you do it, and why should they do it? So maybe this is the last thing for thought.
Thank you very much. Very insightful and many proposals, very concrete field work. Congratulations. I would like to ask Pavel Havlicek, who always has some interesting views on what the Czech Republic is able to do on the international turf or not do, or at EU level. Is this suggestion even possible, implementable? With whom? Floor is yours. 3 minutes. Make your point.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think this is a wonderful suggestion that you made, because I think, unfortunately, the opposition inside of the country is not capable, and we need to be combining efforts. And the international audience and international stakeholders need to be, together with you, actually putting pressure on the government. I think there is no other way. We have seen this in the past months. But if you allow me, I will maybe structure my intervention in 3 points, because we are also discussing the perception of reality in Ukraine, from the Czech and German angle. So first, and I will then elaborate on each of the points, if you like. First, I would like to take us back, last year, December. Before that, we had a government that was not like this one, actually. We had, and we still keep having, president that is until recently the biggest friend of Putin in Southeastern Europe. We had a government whose vice prime minister was willing to travel to Moscow. You had the speaker of the previous chamber of deputies who actually traveled to Moscow for negotiations and things like that. So I know that this sounds really prehistoric by now, but this was still a reality until December last year. So perceptions
I think
of
the Germans can relate to that.
exactly, and this was my point, because the reality in Czechia and Germany, and also how our research last year have proved, was quite similar, coming from a different perspective, but ending with the same result. Put in first tier policies. So first point. Second, since December last year, many things really changed in this country, and Germany and the German diplomacy was not able to grasp this and really follow suit. So while Czechia was, I think, constantly trying to reach out, and we were also calling for a closer sort of coordination on the war agenda, this did not happen. Despite the proclamation, Zeitwende, and all that, we are still missing the results, and Germany is going here, and Czechia is going to the camp of Poland, Baltic states, and so on. And here we see the divergence. And I think, and I'm going to end on this third point that Martin made, we have this homework. And this is also relating to the question that you asked and the previous point. And the homework is really to go back from this divergence. And this needs to be done through the pressure. This needs to be done domestically, from the societal level. We have this kind of homework. This is both security related, it's foreign policy related. That is also why we last June we called for sort of a mini strategic compass in the Czech-German relations, to reconnect, to do things more together and really prevent this divergence from further happening. I saw over the last half year the highest number of German politicians coming over to Prague. And I saw the huge interest. We had everybody, Habeck, Lindner, everybody was here. Obviously, your minister as well. So I think there is a good common ground for that, but we really need to act, and we really need to exercise pressure. And I would say, and I would argue, above all, on the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is the political take. We had we started with concrete proposals, and I'm very happy actually. Let me move to Mrs. Homolova, who is a historian by training and who's been working on a different turf, the academic turf. So she has met with people having different approaches and holding different discourse or spreading different narratives regarding Ukraine. Can you elaborate on the different perceptions which you encountered in Czech academia and in academia abroad, with examples? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with the Western or German universities and academia. I'll start with the significant role of Russian scholars in exile, which are present at the German universities, and the Ukrainian ones are there as a minority, which influences significantly the debate, because the topics about Ukraine are dealt through the perspective of the Russian scholars, which the Russian scholars, if they are anti-Russian, it doesn't automatically mean that they are pro-Ukrainian. And for example, now the new contracts for Ukrainian scholars that actually made it to Western Europe, they are more or less short-term. So they don't really count with them for a long-term debate. And I'm talking about social sciences and especially about history. And in general, the Ukrainian narrative is perceived as too aggressive. That's why maybe too controversial. And that's also that there is not enough space to actually hear the point from the Ukrainian scholars. And there are new projects established in Western Europe, for example, the EPS consortium, which is dealing with Ukraine. It looks great. But, for example, none of the members actually understand Ukrainian. And it's created from the Western European scholars and Russian scholars. And of course, Ukraine is losing their allies every day in the battlefield. And only a minority of them can actually make it to Western Europe. And our role is, or our goal is, to stop seeing the Ukraine as something which should be seen through the Russian perspective. We should connect directly to the Ukraine with the Ukrainian scholars and debate with them, see their point of view, which in Czech Republic or in Czechia it's more successful, but there is a difference with the amount of resources. So it cannot be done in a large scale. For example, we don't have enough sources to actually create our new Ukrainian colleagues at universities, because they come usually with their families and it's really expensive. And there are no resources for that, or not enough. So let's finish this imperial debate or this colonial debate about Ukraine, and let's hear the Ukrainian perspective, Ukrainian point of view, history, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. Let me move to the journalistic perspective of this issue, and we are lucky to have Claudia von Salzen here, and she has been certainly working in the field on those issues. What are the challenges on reporting on Ukraine in Germany? We've seen in academia it's already a challenge, a linguistic challenge. And the second point I would like to ask you, and how does this disinformation regarding Ukraine end up appearing in German media, albeit the fact that you have very skilled and trained journalists. Who drops the ball where?
Yes, we already mentioned the Zeitenwende a few times today. My point is that Germany spectacularly missed the real Zeitenwende, which happened in 2014. In order to understand what's going on now, I just would like to take you back for a very brief moment to the situation then. So the German government still continued to try to play chess with Russia after the Kremlin had already completely overturned the chessboard. So, and in 2014, the German public and most parts of the German media landscape were in no way prepared for the wave of Russian disinformation that we've seen. And there were really vicious attacks in social media against any journalist who wrote that Ukraine is a normal country and deserves to be defended. If you look at it now, it's really unimaginable what was going on then. But to understand today's situation, we have to take this into account. So it really took a long time to start to push back against Russian disinformation. For example, against the narrative that there are Nazis on Maidan, there are Nazis in the new Ukrainian government. You still find it until today that some people believe it. We'll come to that in a moment. And there was also a former Chancellor of Germany, and I don't mean the one that you are all thinking about now, but I mean Helmut Schmidt, who said in a very famous TV program in Germany in 2014 that perhaps Ukraine isn't a real country at all. So what's the problem? So I would say there wasn't enough knowledge about Ukraine and also not enough interest in Ukraine in a too large part of German society. That, of course, it made it difficult for media to push back against this, and it made it so easy for Russian propaganda to reach its goals. So Germany's failed Russia policy literally lasted until February of this year, and Rebecca Harms already quoted the foreign minister who said, "We all woke up to a new situation, or to a new world." So yeah, Germany only woke up in February 2022, and this is unfortunately the problem. So only then German society started to come to terms with facts that I think the society in this country, no matter what the government here was, had already known for a long time that Ukraine is a sovereign and democratic country that deserves to be able to defend itself, and that the Russian regime is a threat, not only for Ukraine, but for us as well. So now we seem to be getting it, but it takes time, and I think you really need to be patient with us. If I have one more minute, I'd like to tell you about an opinion poll that was recently conducted in Germany and that I found rather shocking, because I hope that we would be a little farther on this way already now. So it was a poll conducted by an institute called CEMAS, and they asked more than 2,000 Germans. 9% of people responded that the war in Ukraine was necessary to remove a fascist government. Only 76% said no, this is not true. The rest was undecided or said it might be partly true. 12% believe that Ukraine collaborated with the US in a secret program to develop biological weapons, which is a very typical narrative of Russian disinformation. 14% think that Ukraine really is a part of Russia. And even 19%, so 1 in 5 Germans, agrees that NATO provoked Russia until Russia had to go to war with Ukraine. And what I find shocking is that only 60% said no, and the rest again says it's partly true. So the really worrying part here is that compared to a poll that the same organization conducted in April, the percentage of people believing this kind of disinformation has even grown. So Russian disinformation is still falling on very fertile ground in Germany, and we have a long way to go.
Well, cheer us up, Tomasz. Please tell us those are not your problems in Prague.
Well, it's a bit difficult for me to comment so much about the Czech public opinion or about the Czech policies, because I'm rather covering and more following what's going on in Germany than what's going on in Czech Republic in a way. But to a little bit follow up on what has been discussed here till now, I think it's interesting is Martin's point that it's a question of expectations. So, for example, these poll results that you now mentioned, one could read them also in a positive way, that only 12%.
Only 9%.
And I believe like there are some polls that show a steady willingness of a clear majority of voters of all parties except AfD that they want to support Ukraine despite higher costs, being energy costs and other costs. I think even Die Linke, where you wouldn't really expect it, it's approximately half-half. So I read those polls rather like positively, and you know, and so that's one point. So another point that I wanted to make about the Czech debate, that looking at social media, reading some articles, opinion articles in major daily newspapers, sometimes I felt that the main culprit of the war is not Putin, but Germany. But I think sometimes this criticism of Germany here, in my opinion, has been really exaggerated.
Unfair.
And unfair. And there was a little bit of a certain triumphalism hidden behind it, as if we told you so, we are right. But as we spoke about before, we were not so different. We are as dependent on Russian energy, and we did as little to be more diversified as Germany did. We have our politicians that are much closer to Putin than any leading, as Schroeder.
You navigated yourself in that hole. I'm not getting you out.
But basically this was one thing that I felt a lot, and there were like opinion articles that were almost doubting in the beginning of the war whether Germany is on the side of Ukraine, whether Germany is a reliable Western ally, whether who will Germany choose between the two sides, between the West and Russia. And so I think there was a lot of exaggeration in the German criticism that on lots of specific counts is justified. So that's like one point that I wanted to make. another point that I maybe wanted to make while looking at I think at Germany, I think in the Czech debate often the whole background is the whole history of this Wandel durch Handelpolitik, lots of lack of let's say strategic thinking in German universities and German think tanks, really issues that are there or that were there for a long time. It was they were ignored in the Czech debate, and I think this context is just important to present in the public debate too, not just simply only criticize what Germany is not doing, but really explain what's the logic, where are they coming from, why is it so difficult for them to change their policies. No? So that was one other aspect that I've wanted to mention about the Czech public debate. And another point that I wanted to make is about maybe the communication of German politicians. Maybe I will make 3 sub-points under this point.
If you have time, Carolina. 30 seconds.
I'll try to say the statements. What Rebecca said, this lack of emotions, the fact that the politicians appear very cold, emotionless, I think that is really something that maybe works well with the German electorate, but abroad it makes Germany not so attractive, and that's something that I felt a lot, that I would like Scholz to choose different words, and just the choice of different words showing some emotions would probably change a little bit the perspective, the perception of Germany in the public here. The second point is, or sub-point, is that when German politicians come here, it's almost impossible to get longer interviews with them as Czech journalists from the print. And also, I mean,
They take no
last
risks.
year, they prefer to give a short interview with correspondents of German media who are here, because then, because that's simply what works for their constituencies. But so I think there is a lack of understanding that they're not only German politicians, that they're European politicians, and that they should talk to the European public. One concrete example, I was asking for an interview with Robert Habeck and last year, 2021, and to the press office I said I can come anytime to any place in Germany and totally adjust myself to his schedule. It just didn't work. He was too busy. And this approach is quite typical. I chose Habeck, but it's, And I will probably, and now I could say some more examples, but time is running.
All right. Thank you. I will ask Martin Vokalek, who is with Europeum and whose think tank has been conducting an analysis on perception of what is going on on the Czech turf, exactly discussing those issues. Tell me about the Czech perception of the conflict in Ukraine among the population. What have you learned through your study?
Just first of all to mention, we are doing the sociological research together with the research with the Sociological Research Institute STEM, and also sometimes AMO also is participating in these projects. So it's not only our data, but the data we have quite recently are from October. They are not published yet, but we are monitoring the overall assessment or overall mood in the society towards also the Ukraine and towards the situation in Ukraine and support of Ukraine in many phases, like the military support, the support for migrants, and so on. First of all, very important thing to mention that there is a quite strong correlation if you follow the overall satisfaction of the citizens with the society and with the, let's say, more or less more broadly the development of the society after the year 1989. And it's very strongly correlating with the attitudes towards the EU in a society. And last but not least, in the same time, it correlates also with the attitude towards Ukraine and Russia aggression and towards support for Ukraine. So then if you focus on a part of society, there is strong correlation. The important thing also there is that it's sort of evolving in time, of course. And last but not least, there is you cannot tell in the Czech society that you are either for or you are either against in all these cases. If you focus on overall support towards support for Ukraine and the steps towards the or against the Russian aggression, like you would get the data quite recently that like usually like 34% of the Czech society is either in favor or rather in favor of supporting Ukraine and helping migrants and so on. Then there is like quite a significant amount of 17% of the citizens who are unsure whether we should support it or not. And then there are like around, let's say 13%, 13 or plus 24%, like let's say 36, 37% who are like rather skeptical or skeptical. And then there is 12%, so similar to Germany, there is 12% of citizens who are believing the German narrative. So this is the society we need to work on. And the important thing there is that we must like really focus on those people who are like rather undecided or somewhere in the middle in communicating there. And the important factor from the research is that if you focus mainly on the support of the Ukraine, usually people are more positive unless you add the question that whether they are able to somehow limit their standards of living and so on. Then it's becoming much more drastic. So the point from that is that within the crisis we are now finding ourselves in energy crisis, economic crisis, and so on. First of all, we must like really focus on the Czech side. We must focus on like trying to solve this one, give people at least some security, some certainty that the situation will be improving, or at least it won't be worse than it is now. And then, of course, these citizens will be more like open to change their perspective on the support of Ukraine. One last positive thing to end up with, it's that there was a peak in the support of Ukraine somewhere between March and April, and after this, it's sort of like fell down, but that stopped now. It stopped now quite recently. So now we are like somewhere in the numbers I was talking about. So this is the field of play we must play with, and we must, like, at least the government here and overall, like, our task should be to communicate, of course, and focus on the impact on Czech citizens, but in the same time, like, try to explain that there is like a direct connection in what's going on in Ukraine, and then once we somehow hopefully manage to support the Ukrainians in that crisis and in the war, we will hopefully soon enough be sort of stabilizing also our situation.
Thank you very much. I would like to close this round with Gerald Knaus, whose expertise is not only being trained in social science, and he's an expert in migration questions. I would like to ask him, because one issue of concern, and which has been used by disinformation, Russian disinformation, is of course the refugee issue. I would like to ask him if or how well did Germany deal with the question of Ukrainian refugees compared to other countries? And if this question is currently likely to become a topic of radicalization of the domestic political discourse, can we have an assessment of that? That would be my first question. Secondly, if possible, I would like, because I know he's been in Moldova, and he's got fresh impressions, and he's been on fact-finding, I would please ask him to share the results of his fact-finding on Moldova. I know it's not directly related, but it is, because it's also an issue of concern regarding EU integration policy. Gerald Knaus, you have 3 minutes, and since you are a Cossack by extraction, it's not 3.5 minutes, it's 3 minutes.
Of course. All right, to try to combine the two questions. 2 days ago, I was traveling for 12 hours with the Moldovan Minister of Interior along all the borders of Moldova. As they are preparing, she told me what happened in the last few months and what they're expecting in the winter. Moldova has taken in 80,000 refugees as one of the poorest countries in Europe. Now, for comparison, Austria is struggling and it has taken in 60,000 Ukrainian refugees with a population of 9 million, right? So it's been a debate in Austria if you can cope. It's very interesting because, of course, not just in Moldova, but all over Europe, it is very clear that Vladimir Putin miscalculated once again. He expected that if there'd be 1 or 2 million Ukrainian refugees, this would create massive divisions in Europe. He's seen how Europeans reacted to very small numbers coming from Belarus. You know, Poland declaring state of emergency, building a wall, suspending EU law. So the sense of panic, and I was in Moscow in 2015, and I remember talking to intellectuals close to the Kremlin. They were elated by the refugee crisis. This is our chance to get our friends, and they will gain support. And of course, Salvini's and other stories confirmed this sense. It didn't happen until now. By now, there are, and the basic numbers are clear, 4.2 million Ukrainians have applied for temporary protection in the EU. It's important to say that many went back of those who came after the 24th of February. So the Polish border guard numbers are a very good indication. 6.4 million Ukrainians crossed the Ukrainian-Polish border to come to Poland since 24th of February until the end of September, but 4.6 million went the other way. Now, of course, some went the other way who'd been in Poland before the 24th, young men to fight, but that means that the net crossings to Poland were about 2 million. So you get these 4 million who are in the European Union who've applied for temporary protection. It's a pretty good indicator, I think. It's the most reliable. They're very unevenly distributed, as you know. The Czech Republic outlier with 450,000 applications for temporary protection. In the German debate, I always compared to Baden-Württemberg, which has the same population as the Czech Republic. It has the largest number of refugees in its history since the 1940s. And it's 130,000 Ukrainians, and you have 450,000 applications here. They have 13,000 non-Ukrainian asylum seekers this year in Germany. In Baden-Württemberg, 130,000 all over. That's been a debate in the recent weeks. I've been in the public saying very often, don't mix these things up. There is no great movement of people across the Balkan route at all. Very few people cross into Greece at the moment. What you see is people leaving Greece who've been there for 2 or 3 years, crossing north. But you only have a big challenge, a sense of a burden because of the Ukrainian refugees. On this, there is still politically strong support. There is a real problem of public administration, though. The foreigners' offices that are supposed to take care are feeling an incredible burden. They have 50% more case loads than before COVID, and less staff. And so they are struggling, and that's a practical problem. They are creating this pressure to the politicians. They say, we can't cope. So what's to be done to get to conclude with the concrete proposal? This whole 4.2 million, the EU has adopted a laissez-faire approach. They just go wherever they want to, and that has made it manageable. But it creates a problem. And if this winter, and it's clearly a Russian strategy to try to create a movement of many more million by targeting the infrastructure and making life impossible, if another 2 or 3 million comes to the European Union in the next 3 months, 2 months, then they will not be staying in Warsaw or in the Czech Republic, because these countries have largely done what they could. And in all those countries, people have been largely welcomed by families or households. Very few are in organized accommodation. That's also true in Germany. That means the big question, if Europe can cope in the next few months, will be, can we sustain civil society support in welcoming people into their homes? If the people who are now in families in Germany would move out of the families because they say we can no longer cope, energy prices are high, we've accommodated people for 6 months, if only half of them would move out, the accommodation system would be in a deep crisis. So what I've proposed recently on a talk show and working with friends and talking to politicians, we need to urgently do 2 things. We need to have support for the families of welcomed Ukrainians. Not in the sense that the state doesn't want to do the job, please civil society do it, but in the sense that the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the 40s cannot be dealt with in an ordinary way. We need civil society to do it. But that also requires, we can look to the United Kingdom, which has a Home for Ukraine program, where people who say we take somebody in for 6 months get money, not as a rent, not as a payment. It's like it's a recognition of their effort. £350 a month. We should have a platform across Europe, and ideally not set up by the European Commission or UNHCR, because I can give you reasons why that wouldn't work.
It's already 4 minutes.
All right, but then I stop in the middle of the proposal.
Not that much of a Cossack.
Right. Okay, well, if you speak German, I send you the link of Ilna where I make the proposal. Good.
Thank you very much. Very insightful round. Carolina, How much time do we have left?
About 20 minutes.
We have 20 minutes for questions. And I encourage you to do this right now. And I open the floor. Questions? Please.
Question from Ukraine.
Can you give me your name and your affiliation?
Yes, of course. My name is Andriy Dikun. I represent Ukrainian Agricultural Council and a founder of the only Ukrainian think tank for the moment. First of all, thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear all these debates here. And just a few comments about refugees. You remember that on the 10th...
You said questions.
Yes,
questions
but it's for you to understand it. On the 10th of October, we had much more attack on Ukraine than on the 24th. But there are no more refugees. So people who are back to Ukraine, they are not willing to run away even after all the things which are happening in Ukraine. I have two questions which is not clear for us as Ukrainians. We understand that there is some problem in mentality, blah, blah, blah things, but you cannot give us enough weapons. That's truth. But why you still give Russians tools to produce food? You sell them seeds, you sell them spare parts for their harvesters and many other things. It's not weapon. You will not stop Russian, read their history. You can stop them when they are hungry. That's the only way. And actually, Putin was preparing for the war, investing billions in the agricultural sector. And now, up to now, a lot of European companies are still operating in Russia. And you give them seeds, not fertilizers, but chemistry, machinery to produce more food. They are food terrorists #1 in the world, and you still give them tools. Question number 2. When we talk about sanctions, you all know such organization which is called Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization. The president of Food and Agricultural Organization is a Chinese guy, and the first deputy is a Russian guy, Mr. Rahmatulin. He is still sitting in Rome. And on the 4th month of war, Food and Agricultural Organization only told to the world that it could be hungry problem in the world. And again, when was very nice story about Russian flags and Ukrainian flags. In a few days, we will participate in exhibition in Hanover together with, which is organized by DELGE, a German Agricultural Society. And we are trying to fundraise some money to help farmers who lost their farms completely. And for last months, we tried to do some announcements through the Facebook, for example, in EU. It's not possible. As soon as you try to talk something about Ukraine, to fundraise money for Ukraine, Russian bots, and you are out of Facebook.
Okay,
So,
let me direct your questions first to Martin Swarovski and to Mrs. Homolova. No? To Mrs. Harms.
I'm glad for this intervention because I can repeat here what I've been claiming for a couple of weeks and months. We should stop lying to ourselves. The EU sanctions is failure. It's a huge failure. So all of the whole government here says, including our minister, that how great we are. It is total failure. It was too late. I was that time in Brussels at the beginning of the war. Actually, the second package was prepared on the eve of the military attack already, and it was kept behind a closed door. DG FISMA closed it behind a closed door, did not distribute among the member states. So it was delayed, and it was not. It did not actually influence the Russian behavior on the battlefield at all. At all. With one exception, this is technological sanctions, that they are not capable of producing semiconductors and microchips, so they do not have a precise weaponry. This is the only thing. Other thing, when I raise this issue in the media, that I'm disappointed, greatly disappointed by EU sanctions, I'm always getting messages from a couple of friends who have friends in Russia, and they would send me pictures about the shopping malls in Russia. They are full of goods. They have everything. They have They do not have a McDonald's. They have some Russian Donald. They cannot buy iPhone. They have different communication. So it is completely fair. And I think we should stop lying into our pockets. What are you referring? We should.
Sorry. you are for not for lifting sanctions. You are in favor of making them more consequential.
Of course, yeah, but
Against lying
all
about
is,
sanctions.
sanctions. But sanctions is coercive policy.
Yeah.
It is not punitive policy. It is not defense policy. It is coercive policy. It did not coerce Russia at all. So we need to be prepared also in the longer term, even for lifting the sanctions. Or lifting the sanctions after clear, all Russians gone from Ukraine, clear period. But what you're referring to, it is that we need, European Union need to target third countries and third markets. Because a lot of goods, Western goods, is just re-exported through Turkey, Greece, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and it is very difficult to target the third countries. But we, EU, I would expect EU to be ready to target our own EU companies who are using the third markets, right? So we need to target EU companies who are, every day we have a lot of trucks between Latvia and Russia coming, a lot of trucks. And we should target, for instance, this payment card MIR. And at the very beginning, SWIFT became a buzzword. I was asking, what does it mean that we just cut the SWIFT? Does it mean that we protect the banks from doing business? Not at all. So, as I said, we should.
Bank would beg to differ here.
Even during the summer, in the 6 packages, we were discussing about further sanctioning of banks. After having dozens of thousands of victims, why they are still functioning? So, I think we should change the narrative. And my claim is EU sanctions is failure. And we need to provide more help, as I said, target our own companies, because this is a huge hypocrisy. I agree completely with
Mrs. Harms?
Yeah, so this, I think, has a long prologue, and it started with the Minsk agreements and the idea that there is no military solution to the war Russia started against Ukraine. But that the West would react with diplomacy and with economic and targeted personalized sanctions. And since 2014, so it's the Europeans are overdoing the impact of their sanctions. So there are impacts, but not in an adequate way. If you say, so no military solution, but so we go the other way. And I would say that for me at least, so the biggest shock after February 24th was because before from the European Commission publicly had declared, in case Russia is really going to invade Ukraine, then we will react with the toughest economic sanctions, energy embargo, etc. And then what happened? So it happened, first of all, nothing. It took months to agree on first energy sector sanctions. It's still ongoing. Meanwhile, in Germany, we are discussing about Wintershall. So one of these gas companies owned by Gazprom or controlled by Gazprom now, so it's all different. But so they are meanwhile getting public money in this crisis to overcome economic problems. But obviously they are still producing, exporting and producing in Russia parts of the fuel which is needed to fly the jets, the Russian military jets to Ukraine to shell and bombard Ukrainian cities. And so that's one of the companies really in the core of developing the Russia strategy in the energy sector. Now with public support and still so supporting the warfare, directly the warfare of Russians against Ukraine. So that's where we stand with energy sanctions. And I think so as much as I see the needs for ministers in the presidency role right now to be cautious about critiques. So this needs discussion because I think in the long run, so the Germans, at least, it will be difficult to convince them that the war has to be so decided by the Ukrainians. So they will continue to discuss other means than military means. So this huge camp of undecided German citizens is also very much influenced by politicians, former politicians, in this case also an ex-chancellor, Angela Merkel, who still defends what she is responsible for. She says in the few interviews she gave, she says nothing to regret. So it was all necessary in every detail. So this is the challenge.
Carolina, how much time left?
10 minutes.
10 minutes for the last round of questions. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm the Dutch ambassador here in Prague, and my Danish colleague is as well. We're both neighboring countries of Germany, and I think we could say that both of us got to terms living to that big neighbor, which also, of course, we had a nasty 5 years. I think we were on good terms, etc. If you compare that to the Czech Republic, I think the Czech Republic, in my observation, if I can share that, is where we used to be 30 years ago. If I saw the reaction of the Czechs to the, for example, the new government coalition, which was, not very nuanced, many things they didn't like, and was very much openly voiced. And one observation, if we have a new government, my prime minister goes to Berlin in 1 or 2 weeks. I guess in Denmark maybe the same. Fiala was only in Berlin in May. Now there was COVID, etc. But it's a totally different response. And it's still sort of denying a reality that you have to come to terms with your big neighbor and you rely on that big neighbor. So maybe the reaction is that just an observation of an ambassador, or is that something you recognize mostly at Czech colleague?
May I dare ask for a Danish perspective?
Yes, well, I would fully agree with my Dutch colleague Dan that in Denmark we have a much more positive appreciation of the German Zeitenwende. It may be too late, as you said, but on the other hand, it's a huge supertanker that is turning around. If you look back to the Second World War and the history behind, for instance, investment in military in Germany. But the ambition now is to have the third largest, I think, military in the world once it has been fully accomplished. And I think, therefore, from a Danish perspective, we would also say the important thing in Europe is unity, and Germany is probably the biggest player in creating that unity, financially, military, politically, and in many other ways. So, yeah, maybe I miss also a little bit sort of a more forthcoming approach from some of the Czech constituency.
It appears that we should have added to our explanations, because the concept was get a think tank approach, get an academia approach, get a journalistic approach. We should have added a diplomatic approach. Oh, Gerald, you will have the last word.
Oh, but just to add from the refugee perspective, because this will be interesting this winter. In Germany, a decision was made that Ukrainian refugees are treated like all recognized refugees. And that means that they will be treated like Germans. So if you're a Ukrainian woman, a mother with a child, you get social support, you get support for your living, you get support for heating. In Germany, you end up with 1,400 euros. This is important. I think it's the right decision. In France, that woman and that child get 500 euros to live, which explains why in France you have 100,000 Ukrainians and in Germany you have 1 million, right? That's fine if we don't have any more people leaving in the winter. But I think if we want to define a creative solution, a few interesting things that the Czech Republic can do, which has taken in per capita many more than the Germans, and I know in the Dutch debate when I'm asked by Dutch journalists, because there is a crisis of reception,
I think you need to tell your Czech story of how the Czech Republic managed to host hundreds of thousands. But we also need to think of how in Europe, and there I think families and civil society becomes crucial. If we would have a platform where a family in France, on a European platform, can say, I'm willing to take Ukrainians this winter. And then we have a European fund, or some fund, where this family could be supported. We don't need the support of the French government, because legally they're allowed to go there. Legally they can go to Valencia. 50,000 Ukrainians went to Ireland. Half the number in Ireland as in all of France. If we create European civil society initiatives like this, platforms mobilizing populations, mobilizing citizens, and say it's a European effort to respond to Putin, who's trying to knock Europeans out by threatening them and polarizing society with refugees, we will respond, we will not allow this. We also have European integration from the bottom, because this changes attitudes to Ukraine more than anything. I mean, in Germany, don't underestimate, with 1 million Ukrainians, from a country Germans didn't know much about, in households, talking about Ukraine, in schools, in villages, in families. If this refugee reception over the winter, as a humanitarian response, works, it brings Germans, French, others, and Ukrainians closer together than any measure the European Commission could take. So let's be more creative, and I think the Czech Republic and Czech civil society and the Czech government have a credibility as the biggest host of refugees per capita in all of Europe to propose ideas how to do that. And hopefully nobody will come in the winter and people return. But from what I hear from my Ukrainian friends in Berlin, talking to people in Kiev, and what Ukrainian politicians are saying, they are now already saying, don't go back to Ukraine. Now, the logical next step is, if you have a 2-week cut off of electricity or heat in big cities, to send at least the women and children again to Europe, and we should be ready.
So Klitschko said they would evacuate eventually left bank of Kiev.
Yeah.
Excuse me, my colleague, Martin Swarovski,
Only one sentence.
always has to have the last word.
Sorry.
I apologize.
Sorry, no, I just need to explain, because I was referring to trucks going between Latvia and Russia. I just wanted to say it is not Latvian companies, it is not just Latvian goods, it is a European problem, right? So, just putting in the context, right?
Okay, we have settled this. I thank you very much, and I honestly think we did great. I hope we bring new ideas home, and we have found some ideas and solutions and suggestions, and I hope we'll be able to engage during the conference. Thank you very much.
Last word for me, we still have like 5 minutes, so feel free to use it for network, and if you want to ask.
Or cup of coffee.
Yeah.